Hello, my name is Blair. Welcome back to my channel and welcome back to the Sensory Awareness series. Today is day 9 and so I want to discuss some different non-meltdown responses to sensory overload. And the first one I want to talk about today are sensory shutdowns. When I imagine the brain during a meltdown, I'm imagining inside the skull, there's a little guy standing at the control panel of the brain, and if you have SPD, you need at least 27 arms to work this thing, but everything's beeping and blinking and chaotic, and then suddenly it just starts smoking, and then it just short circuits and explodes. But a shutdown is when everything's blinking and beeping, and then a trapdoor suddenly opens underneath the little person, and then they just fall into the brain dungeon and they can't even reach the control panel anymore. You kind of have an Yzma moment where you're like, why do we even have that lever? But it's worse because you're like, this is my own brain. I don't remember installing that. When I'm in shutdown, it feels like I'm screaming on the inside of my mind, but my body is completely frozen, and I can't move it no matter how much I want to. The shutdown SPDer might be unresponsive to things that normally work to bring them back down from sensory overload, like a favorite blanket or a glass of water. They might also be unresponsive to language, and unable to use it themselves. In this way, they're almost worse than meltdowns, because with meltdowns, at least you're crying or shouting or doing something. But shutdowns can be really scary for somebody looking on from the outside because it seems like the person is just gone. This is very similar to the psychological experience called dissociation. If you aren't familiar, dissociation is an interruption in normal brain processing where the brain decides that this event is too harmful or traumatic to experience to the full, so it kind of separates itself from everything that's going on. The person may have the feeling that what is going on around them isn't real or that they themselves are not real. Another common feature is feeling really far away from the body and the sensations that it's experiencing. Some people describe dissociation as feeling like they're outside of themselves, watching things happen. Later, when the person tries to remember what actually went on during that time period, they might not be able to, and this is called dissociative amnesia. Dissociation is not always a part of shutdown. When I'm in shutdown, sometimes I dissociate and sometimes I don't. But I did want to mention dissociation because I feel like they look very similar from the outside, and I think you can respond to them in some of the same ways. Responding to a shutdown can be even harder than responding to a meltdown because the person can seem like they're completely absent. You can offer a hug or a favorite snack to someone who's crying, but what do you do with someone who's catatonic? Well, much like meltdowns, the best way to prevent them is by being proactive. I don't think there's really much of a difference as to what specific situations would provoke a meltdown instead of a shutdown or vice versa. Some people with SPD can tend more towards one or the other just based on their own personality. The same questions that I mentioned in yesterday's video can also help you create an action plan for a shutdown. If you can't prevent it, if you don't have an action plan or anything like that, the strategies from my meltdown video still apply. Keep your cool, make sure the person cannot hurt themselves, and just wait it out. Other neurodiverse people that I've talked to have told me that quiet and dark places are really good. I would agree with this as well. It's better to be in a calm place when you're coming back to your body so that you're not blasted back into sensory overload right away. So you could possibly help the person to a place that is comfortable and calm. One thing that you could possibly do, although I recommend this very carefully, is to give the person some kind of sensory input that you know is normally beneficial for them. Like, if I'm in shutdown and I'm with my boyfriend, he will give me a really tight hug because that proprioception kind of helps me to reconnect with myself so I can climb out of the brain dungeon. But that was something we talked about beforehand when I was not in a state of sensory overload. Again, please be very careful with this one. Don't just go hugging random people. That will not help them out of the brain dungeon. Now on to burnout! Meltdowns and shutdowns are acute responses to sensory overload, while sensory burnout is a chronic reaction. Some signs that a person with SPD has entered into a state of burnout include increased fatigue, increased irritability, increased feelings of sadness or numbness, low self-esteem, an even lower threshold for sensory triggers, and a shorter attention span. Meltdowns and shutdowns usually only last up to a couple hours. They do have after effects that can continue throughout the day or into the next day. But sensory burnout can last for weeks or months. Most commonly, sensory burnout is caused by prolonged periods of stress. Now, living with SPD is kind of stressful by default, so sometimes sensory burnout can occur even when there's no obvious cause. It's really exhausting to live in a world that you constantly have to fight to understand. But life changes like switching schools, moving, or starting a job can also induce burnout while the person responds to the change. Even if the change is good, even if it's something that the person looks forward to, the adjustment period is likely to be longer for them than it is for the average person, and some burnout symptoms might happen. Responding to sensory burnout is a little more complicated than responding to a one-off meltdown or shutdown. It requires taking a step back and looking at everything that you're being asked to do and all the commitments you have. I never want to flippantly recommend things like, just find a different job, or like, just change your schedule around, because I know that people come from all sorts of life situations, and I don't want to assume that you, the person watching this video, are able to just do something like that. But here are some things to consider. Cutting something out of your schedule permanently. Cutting something out of your schedule temporarily or doing it less often. Changing a time for something in your schedule. Asking for accommodations so that a certain required thing isn't so hard. Making time to stim, even if it's just when you go to the bathroom for 5 minutes. Say no to new commitments so that you don't accidentally overbook yourself. Or use tools to help you throughout the day, like fidget toys or ear protectors. I think shutdowns and burnout are really important to talk about because they are kind of less noticeable responses to sensory overload, but they can still create just as many problems, and they're still just as frustrating and scary for the person with SPD to go through. So that's all I have to say for today about sensory shutdowns and burnout, and now we're at the end of day 9. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. Make sure to do something sensational today, and hopefully I will see you back tomorrow. Bye! Why do I keep deviating? I write the script for a reason. Dang it.